Namaste and welcome to our Sunday service at the Vedanta Society of Greater Houston. So I'll begin as always with a chant, but this time a different one pertaining to the subject. Om Brahma Swarupa Parama Jyoti Rupa Sanatani Sarva Vidyadhi Devi Tasyai Vanyai Namo Namaha Yaya Vina Jagat Sarvam Shashwat Jivan Mritam Bhavet Jnanadhi Devi Tasyai Saraswati Namo Namaha Yaya Vina Jagat Sarvam Mukamun Matta Vatsada Ya Devi Vagadhishtatri Tasyai Vanyai Namo Namaha. O Mother, you are the personification of Brahman, the Supreme Spirit. You are the light divine, the eternal being. You are the presiding deity of all branches of learning. Salutations to you, O goddess of speech. But for you, the whole world would be lifeless. You are the presiding deity of knowledge. Salutations to you, O goddess of learning. But for you, the whole world would be mute and mad. You are the presiding deity of speech. Salutations to you, O Mother, O goddess of speech. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat. Om peace, peace, peace be unto us all. So today the subject is Saraswati, the goddess of learning. But I have been asked by some of you to speak first about the situation we're facing right now in this country, in the U.S. And so I want to speak about that. It's not tied to the subject, and I'm not going to try to artificially tie it to the subject. I'll just say a few words about it, and then begin the talk on Saraswati. So the situation, of course, that I'm speaking of is the situation with the protests within this country and the general awareness, which has become very painful to many, of the racial condition of the country, or the condition of racial attitudes in the country, and the condition of racial inequality in the country. And as you know, this was occasioned by the killing of George Floyd, African-American man, by a police officer in Minneapolis. And so there have been, the last I heard, there were protests in over 700 cities across the U.S. So that's a tremendous thing. This sort of thing hasn't happened since the 1960s, during the protests of the Vietnam War, during the Civil Rights Movement, and first, and then after that, the protests against the Civil War, against the Vietnam War, sorry. And so this is a major event in the U.S. When you protests in 700 cities in the U.S., that is far beyond New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, Houston, Atlanta. It's beyond cities down to towns across the country where there are protests. And so from a Vedantic perspective, because everything here we teach is from a Vedantic perspective, our perspective on life itself, perspective on everyday life and everyday phenomena is from a Vedantic perspective. So from a Vedantic perspective, how are we to see the present turmoil across the country? One thing that we should always have from a Vedantic standpoint is the ability to see clearly that which is happening, whatever it is. In good times, in bad times, there's no cause from a legitimate cause from a Vedantic perspective to be afraid of such phenomena. Yes, they are unsettling. And yes, many people, their nerves are raw right now. That's understandable, and that is natural. I'm not speaking against that. But the sense people have that, oh, the country is falling apart, well, even if it does, we shouldn't be fearful. It's not going to fall apart. But even if it were, we should be able to maintain our steadiness of perspective and see that which is happening. That is critically important for us as Vedantins, not to allow fear to take over. Now, there's fear and there's fear, as I said in a talk recently on fear. And that is, if someone is coming to attack me, then of course I'm going to be afraid. There's a natural fear. If I suddenly, unexpectedly come upon a snake in my path, naturally there's going to be the spontaneous reaction of fear. That is natural fear. But the general fear of the unknown, fear of what is going to happen, that we should learn to overcome. That too has become natural, but it's unnatural in itself. It's become natural, meaning that we have become accustomed to reacting to the unknown with fear. But as I've said so many times, our philosophy of life, our way of viewing life should be large enough to be able to face life as it is. Vedanta has to prepare us to face life as it comes to us, every situation that comes to us. And so coming to the specific situation of the tension that is created by the disparity among the races, the disparity in opportunity, the disparity in healthcare, the disparity, which of course is part of opportunity, disparity of education, access to education, which is part of opportunity, disparity in employment and income, which is part of opportunity, the economic disparity, part of the larger disparity of opportunity, that has suddenly been exposed in a large way. Many people were aware of it before, but many preferred not to pay attention to it. Many preferred just to think that, the things are improving, things are getting better, and gradually things will keep getting better until there's no more problem of racism. Many people thought that with the election of Barack Obama, that the problem of racism in the country had ended. But the lie of that was soon exposed after his election, when there was the reaction against his election. And there was a tremendous upsurge in the purchasing of guns across the country because we had a black president. The number of people who, not in loud public open ways, but in less than open ways, were saying that how can there be a black man in the White House? Meaning the White House is meant for white people. And so this reaction of racism against having a black president, whether you agree with his policies or not, that's aside from the point. But the fact that a black man could become president, that was seen as a sign of great hope by many, not just in the black community, but in the white community also, those of goodwill. They saw it as a wonderful sign of a healing within the country. But many were terribly upset by it. That has no place in Vedanta. Vedanta teaches the divinity of every being and the respect that is due to every being. As Swami Vivekananda said, that India is a country where privilege has existed as it has in every other society. Privilege of position, privilege of learning, privilege of caste, etc. has existed. But Swamiji said that Vedanta is the philosophy which breaks down privilege, which teaches against privilege. That yes, there will always be differences in life because of different aptitudes, different desires, different temperaments. There will always be some who have more, some who have less. But Swamiji said what we should work towards is equality of access, equality of opportunity. We can't have equality of outcome because of the differences among people. But what we can work towards is equality of opportunity. And that's what is sorely lacking. In the US, half a century ago and before, it looked like we were working towards equality of opportunity with the civil rights movement and the aftermath of the civil rights movement. That is the direction the country was going. But since the 1980s in particular, the restriction of access to the goods of life, the economic disparities that have grown, have only exacerbated what was a problem that looked like we were about to solve it. So let me just finish this, because again, I want to get to the topic, but it is important that we as Vedantists, that we be able to look at actual situations, not just live in a world where we're still arguing with Nyaya and Vaisheshika philosophy and the Mimamsakas who died out several hundred years ago as independent philosophies, and we're unable to look at the present situation and address that. No, we have to, Vedanta has to empower us to look at the present situation, not from a political standpoint, because there is a legitimate argument for conservatism, there is a legitimate argument for progressivism, there is a legitimate argument for liberalism. All of these political philosophies have their legitimate arguments. But there's some questions which are questions of morality and immorality, of dharma and adharma, which is much bigger, as I've often said, than just the question of morality and immorality. There are some positions which are dharmic. For instance, if Vedanta teaches that the soul is inherently divine, no matter what the condition of the person, that their true nature, whether they know it or not, is divine, then every person should be respected. Yes, if a person comes to harm me or comes to harm innocent people, I have a right and society has a right to protect itself from that. But that doesn't mean hatred of groups of people. There's no place for that. And so the response of a Vedantin should be one of respect towards the whole world, respect towards all, respect based on the recognition of the divinity of all beings, in spite of all of the differences of opinion, differences of philosophy, difference of religion, difference of ethnicity, difference of culture, the inherent respect for the divinity of all, and acting on that respect. Acting on that respect and learning to respect all. And where I can help, let me help. Where I can't help, let me back off and not hurt at least. If I can help, let me help. If I can't help, at least let me be careful that I don't hurt. And so with that, I'll say that there's nothing to fear in the present circumstances. Many people, again, feel like a raw, exposed nerve right now, and that's understandable. But let us look at the situation, look at it with love, look at it with acceptance, look at it with the will to see and to promote the idea of the divinity of all. Expressed in the Namaskara gesture, the Namaskara Mudra, let us call it a mudra, sacred gesture. It is the Namaskara Mudra. That is of recognizing the divinity in others and saluting that divinity. So now let me come to Saraswati, the goddess of learning, which is the talk today. And so let me start by sort of an introduction to this series. This is the first in what I plan to be a series on the gods and goddesses of Hinduism, of Vedanta, of India, but now much larger than India, and even for millennia larger than just India. So what is the place of gods and goddesses? When Swami Vivekananda came to this country, he taught Vedanta. He didn't even teach Ramakrishna, the personality of Ramakrishna. He taught the principles of Vedanta and said that it's the principles that are important. When he came to America the second time in 1899, lasting into the first half of 1900, he brought Sister Nivedita with him. And Sister Nivedita went around, first spent some time with him at Ridgely Manor, And then she went around the U.S. trying to raise money for her work of education of Hindu girls in India. And so naturally, she went to some of Swami Vivekananda's friends in America. For instance, she went to Mary Hale in Chicago. Now, Mary Hale belonged to the Hale family that had been one of Swamiji's most dear families in America. None of them ever became Vedantists, but they loved Swamiji as a son in the case of the parents, and as a brother in the case of the sisters and their two cousins, Harriet and Isabel McKinley. And so it was a family that was very devoted to Swamiji, not religiously devoted to his philosophy, though they had no trouble with it. They belonged to a Christian denomination called Christian Science, which had some influence, direct influence from Hinduism. Mary Baker Eddy, the founder of Christian Science, in her first edition of her famous book, which forms the Bible of the Christian scientists, she quoted from the Gita. In the later, second and later editions, she took out those quotations because she realized that Christians were not ready to accept a form of Christianity which had been influenced by Hinduism. But it was directly influenced by Hinduism, documentedly so. And so they had no problem with Swamiji's philosophy, but they were not interested in taking up the Vedanta as a philosophy. They just loved Swamiji, and Swamiji loved them. So again, Sister Nivedita went to them to try to seek help in raising money for her school, her project of educating Hindu girls in India. And because she had become a great devotee of Kali, she remained all of her life a person with deep devotion to Kali, deep and personal connection to Kali. She wrote a beautiful book, which when anyone asks me about Kali, I always recommend her small booklet called Kali the Mother. In the short, concise form, it's the best place to get a feeling for the meaning and significance and reality of Kali. But Mary Hale reacted severely. She had never heard Swamiji talk about gods and goddesses, and so she wrote a letter to Swamiji, so somewhat horrified. We don't have her letter, we just have Swamiji's response. And Swamiji says in his response, "I have never taught Kali nor any other deity. I teach the truths of the Upanishads, which are universal and applicable in any society." So Swamiji divorced himself from Nivedita's enthusiasm for Mother Kali. Though it was through Swamiji that Nivedita had come to that deep attraction to Kali. So Swamiji in his public work here, he always taught universal principles. So then why should I speak about Hindu gods and goddesses? Good question. Maybe I shouldn't. No, I do, because once you come into Vedanta, you of course find out more and more about traditional Hinduism. But besides that, Westerners or people in other cultures, it doesn't have to, I speak in terms of Westerners because that's where we are in the Occident, in the West. But you could be Japanese, you could be Chinese, you could be African, whatever. But when I say Westerners, I mean people outside of India for right now. But I'll speak in terms of Westerners because that's our context. So Westerners, when they read more about Vedanta and they begin to find the connections into traditional Hinduism, they of course come across the gods and goddesses. And there is often a fascination. There may at first be a reaction, negative reaction, as Mary Hale had. I don't know if she ever got over her negative reaction because she never associated herself with any Vedanta society, later married and moved to Italy where she lived the rest of her life. But many of us who come to Vedanta, not born into Vedanta, but come to Vedanta, we gradually find that the world of the deities has a fascination. When I first came to the Chicago Center, and the Swami Bhashyananda, the head of the Chicago Center at that time, he was in Gangestown, Michigan at the retreat. So he wasn't there at the center for the first 2 days I was there. So the man who met me at the door, he took me up to the shrine and he went and bowed, putting his nose down into the carpet, bowing before these pictures that were on thrones. elaborate carved chairs. So these pictures seated on chairs, and then him bowing down, putting his face to the carpet in front of them. And my sudden reaction was, this is wrong. This is wrong. I'm not going to do this. Because I had been attracted to the Vedanta teachings. I had also been attracted to the deities even before I came to my first center. But that childhood training where bowing down before an image is not just not part of the Christian or Jewish or Islamic religion, it's actually an evil. It's actually evil. In the Ten Commandments, the basic moral principles of Christianity and Judaism, it said, thou shalt not make any graven image, and you should not bow down before any graven image. So that is a moral principle of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. It is evil to do it. It's hateful to God. And so that, as growing up as a Christian, though by this time I had rejected Christianity, I don't now, but I had at that time rejected Christianity. I had taken up Hinduism. I had read about Sri Ramakrishna's worship of Kali, and that was fascinating and very beautiful to me. But still, that entrained religious indoctrination I had had as a child, my first reaction when I saw this man going like that in front of pictures seated on chairs was, this is wrong. So I quickly overcame that. I quickly overcame it because I saw that the people were good, and I learned more about Ramakrishna and Vivekananda and Holy Mother, and came to see why one would want to bow before them. And I came to see the value of an image. But again, that is the reaction of many. I know of others, devotees, when I was in San Diego, where all of our devotees were, in the beginning, were Western, coming and seeing people bowing down in the shrine. They were shocked. They said, I am not going to do that. So, and so for many of us in the West, when we come to Hinduism, our background with deities is of Greek and Norse mythology, where they're stories which are interesting and have a psychological value, but no one takes them as religiously seriously. And so, but what I found in India, after I eventually went to India and went to stay for years at a time, was that the mythology in India is not like the Greek and Norse mythology now. At one time, Greek and Norse mythology was a living mythology. That is, the gods and goddesses were living to the people who worshipped them. They were part of their daily experience. That is the case in India, where the deities are part of a living environment, an environment where the gods and goddesses are alive. Alive in the minds of the people, alive in the temples where people go and offer worship and so forth, but alive also in the experience of the devout people. And what I mean by that, you find when you read the life of Sri Ramakrishna, that his father, there's so many experiences. A goddess would come and bend down the branches of trees when he would go to pluck flowers for his worship. When he was crossing a field one day and he laid down to take a nap, then he had a vision of Rama that said, I am lying here unrecognized. Please take me home. And when he woke up, he saw that there was a shalagrama stone, the symbol, a Rama shalagrama, a symbol of Vishnu, but the type of shalagrama, fossilized stone, which is sacred to Rama, which represents Rama. So he took that home and worshipped it. And in so many ways, he had experiences of gods and goddesses. His wife, Chandra Devi, also had experiences of gods and goddesses. The parents of Holy Mother as well. When you read the life of Swami Vivekananda, a man of great rationality, and yet you see at the edges of his life, what to us are the edges of his life, but it was not edges to him, it was part of his life. There is this living mythology. In fact, his mother had prayed to Shiva for his birth and considered that he had been a gift of Shiva. And so you find that this sense that the gods and goddesses are a living part of life, that they're alive, they're real, and they are part of the life of humanity. There's a beautiful saying, a Holy Mother, or a anecdote from Holy Mother's life, where a devotee said that Holy Mother, when she was at the Udbodhan in Calcutta, the Mayarbadi now as it's called, Mother's House in Bagh Bazar in Calcutta, that she would do the worship. She had an altar in her bedroom, where it still is. Her bedroom now is kept as a shrine, but her altar was there of the Sri Ramakrishna and other deities. And then she would serve them food in the adjacent room. And so this person said that when Mother would rise from having done the worship, she would tell the deities on the shrine, "Come now, let us have prasad." And she would go into the other room. The person said that one had the feeling that the deities were actually walking behind Mother into the other room to get their prasad, that it was a living, tangible experience. I knew a Swami Satswarupananda ji, a disciple of Holy Mother, who said that when he went for initiation, that he saw not the Holy Mother seated there giving him initiation, he saw the living Mother Kali. Another Swami who told me about how he received initiation from a goddess, and then later he met Tulsi Maharaj, Swami Nirmalananda, who gave him the same mantra and told him, "This time you won't forget it," because he had forgotten the mantra given by the goddess. And so you see a living mythology. So what is the value of the deities? Well, first of all, you don't need the deities. If you just like the philosophy of Vedanta, that which Swamiji taught, that's enough for your spiritual life, that's enough for liberation, and that is enough to enliven cultures around the world. But again, there are many of us who find out about the deities, and we find that sooner or later one or more of them have a fascination for us. Some are attracted to the beauty and the light-hearted play of Sri Krishna. Some are fall in love with the heroism and the goodness of Ram. Some, I've known many people who are fascinated with Ganesha. Ganesha is probably the deity that most non-Indians fall in love with first. Partly because everyone loves an elephant, everyone loves animals, everyone loves elephants especially, and there's something comic about the figure of Ganesha. That's not disrespectful to Ganesha. It's part of his character, with the pot belly and the elephant head and everything. There's something where you can't, although Ganesha in his origins was a fierce deity, but Ganesha, as he's pictured now, one can't be afraid of Ganesha. One sees him and wants to embrace him. And then many people are first turned away in fear from Kali, but then they turn towards Kali with a fascination also. When I give a talk on Kali, I'll tell stories about that. So let me get on with Saraswati. Just one more thing I want to mention in introducing the series about the gods and goddesses is my own story before I came to Vedanta. I saw, as a teenager, I saw the movie, after having read the book of James Michener, I saw the movie Hawaii. It was based on the book by James Michener named Hawaii. And this would have been back in the 60s, the late middle 60s, around 67, 68, somewhere around there. And there it shows, in one of the scenes, it shows a traditional Hawaiian man who was a priest, where they had gods and goddesses, and as people all over the world had gods and goddesses. And so the Christian missionaries had come and were changing the island and were converting people and destroying the traditional culture and ravaging the island with disease brought by the Europeans and so forth. And so it was a tragic time for the Hawaiian people. And so there's a scene where this man is praying in front of this stone idol, one of the gods, and he's weeping for his people and for his culture. And I thought when seeing this that if one had such longing and such intensity of love and devotion, that even a stone would talk. that even a stone would talk, that even the deity would come to life if one had. And so where that thought came from, it was completely contrary to my background, where deities were superstition only, and stone images were the worst thing, to think that God would be a stone image. But I couldn't help but think, no, if one approached an image with such love and devotion, the image would wake up. And then an acquaintance that I met, I went to his apartment one night. He invited me over to his apartment, and he showed me with great pride an African goddess he had just purchased. It was a black image, an African deity. I have no idea what deity, and he didn't know. It's just a traditional deity from one of the many African cultures. And when I saw that, I thought, I would love to dedicate my life to such a thing, which was a strange idea coming in my mind, because again, I had been trained to think that all such things were superstition. It wasn't something I thought, something that I wanted to think. It was a spontaneous reaction that I want to give myself to such a one. And there was the idea of spontaneous dedication. And so these European civilization also, they had their deities before Christianity destroyed all of the indigenous religions of across Europe, with the idea that there's only one God and that God can't have images. But that is deep in the hearts of all. Deep in the hearts of all. And if that is tapped, then we see the very natural part of it. As in so many other ways, Christianity adapted that innate hunger for deities in the Catholic Church. The Protestants were a reaction against many things in Catholicism, where Catholicism had adapted to aspects of paganism, which was a good thing. That was part of the genius of early Christianity, that it adapted. It saw that you can't kill these things. They serve a purpose. So give them a new Christian purpose. And so in Catholicism, they had the community of saints. The saints took the place of the deities. So a person can pray to Saint Joseph, I lost my car keys. Oh, Saint Joseph, can you please help me find my car keys? The other problems of ordinary life. There's a saint that helps you with every aspect of life, that you pray to this saint for such and such, for curing a particular disease. This is the saint of some other a particular capacity. And so that was the deities come back to life as the communion of saints. Again, Protestantism did away with that and said there's no such thing as a saint. That is paganism, and so we want to be pure Christianity. So they got rid of these adaptations of Christianity to the pagan mind. That was a mistake. That was part of what killed the life of Protestantism. Protestantism has many good things and has done many good things, but it became spiritually almost dead because it killed the very spiritual life of people by trying to be too pure, pure in a doctrinal sense. So now God and the gods. And Swami Vivekananda told Nivedita, the truth, the reality is Brahman, and yet it also is the gods and goddesses. It also manifests as the gods and goddesses. And Swamiji also said on another occasion, these, in an Indian context where he was talking to his fellow Hindus, these deities are not just made up. These are the forms that have been seen by great saints in states of higher consciousness. These are actual forms seen by people. So it wasn't that somebody said at one time, I like elephants, and I think having a pot belly is cute. So let's make a deity with a pot belly and put an elephant head on it. That would be nice. I think I would like that. I would like to worship that. No. These are forms that have been seen by great saints in states of higher consciousness. So, Saraswati is one of them. Saraswati, a form of the Divine Mother, God as Mother. And I wanted to start with her because I have a special attraction to Saraswati, the goddess of learning, the goddess of wisdom, the goddess of culture, the goddess of the arts, goddess of music, etc. So who is she? She is that. She is the goddess of learning. She's the goddess of knowledge, the goddess of wisdom, the goddess of the arts, the goddess of music, the goddess of language. She is known as the consort of Brahma, the creator. But that I wouldn't give too much importance to. It's there, but people who worship Saraswati aren't thinking that I'm worshiping the consort of Brahma. This was a projection of family relationships onto the gods and goddesses, and relating the gods and goddesses to one another. And people here marry, and so the gods and goddesses are married and so forth too. The idea that there's a god and he has his Shakti and all of that, that's based on a human model of society, projection of human models of society onto the deities. But when one worships Saraswati, one worships her for herself. One doesn't go to her because she's the wife of Brahma. I like Brahma, so let me go talk to his wife. No, it's not like that. Or let me go meet his wife. Maybe she's interesting too. Brahma's a great guy. Maybe his wife is a great girl too, so I'll go meet her. No, it's not like that. Saraswati is the goddess of wisdom in herself. She dwells in Brahma Loka as far as Vishnu and Lakshmi dwell in Vaikuntha, Shiva and Durga and Parvati and Kali dwell in Kailasa. And so Brahma Loka is the realm of Brahma, where Brahma, the creator, that is the realm where his being is. And everything else that we see, this and all worlds, are just dreams in the mind of Brahma, who dwells in meditation in Brahma Loka. So because Saraswati was conceived of as the wife of Brahma, she also, her dwelling place is Brahma Loka. Her Vahana, every Hindu deity has a vehicle. Her Vahana is the swan. The swan, beautiful image associated with Saraswati. So in pictures of Saraswati, you'll always find a swan. Because the swan is the emblem of two main things. All of these symbols, you can take out more and more meaning, but it's the symbol of discrimination between the real and the unreal, because the swan is said to be able to take the mixture of milk and water. The swan can take only the milk and leave the water. That's the belief. And there are various attempts to explain that scientifically, and whether a swan can do that or not, I don't know, and I don't care, because the significance is not what an actual physical swan can do. The significance is that it's a symbol of the ability to take the real from the unreal. And so she has a swan because of that. The other is, the swan is, as you see in the symbol of our order, with the snake, the cobra and the swan and the sun and the lotus, it's this sign of illumination, the illumined soul. And so it's the symbol of spiritual perfection and the symbol of spiritual discrimination. So she has the swan as her vahana, as her vehicle. Her special days of observance, there's Saraswati Puja in many parts of India, which is observed on Vasant Panchami, the 5th day of the spring season, which comes in Magha Masa, the month known as Magha, which corresponds to our January, February. So sometimes her puja day will come in late January, sometimes in early February. And in parts of South India, there's a special worship for Saraswati during Navaratri, the 9 sacred days in the fall, when Bengalis worship Durga, and in North India they worship they observe Ram Leela. So in South India, on the Ashtami, Navami, Dashami, the last 3 days of Navaratri, they worship Saraswati. And there are many names of Saraswati. As you know, the deities, different deities like Shiva and Uma and others, have hymns which are 1,000 names. The 1,000 names are Shiva Sahasranama, Uma Sahasranama, Lalita Sahasranama, Vishnu Sahasranama, etc. And so Saraswati has many names also. Just to give a few, of course, the simplest is just Devi, goddess. She's just known as a Devi, as any of the goddesses are known, just as Devi. She's also known as Brahmani, the wife of Brahma, or Brahmi, which means both the wife of Brahma, the creator, or she who is the personification of Brahman, the absolute, which is for me a better meaning of the name, a higher meaning of the name. She's Maha Saraswati. She's mentioned in the Chandi. The day of the Chandi, the story of Ma Durga, there's a part of Maha Saraswati. And then she is also known as Vak, speech, the goddess of speech. Vani, Vak, both names are the goddess of speech. Vagishwari, the goddess of speech. Bharati, which also means the goddess of speech, Bharati. The goddess of speech and the goddess of learning, both Bharati comes from Bharat, but Bharati became associated with the goddess of speech, and so it's a name of Saraswati. Vaneshwari, Vaneshwari, the goddess of speech. Kavi Jihva Vasini. That's a long name, but beautiful if you know Sanskrit. Kavi Jihvagra Vasini. Kavi Jihvagra Vasini. She who lives on the tip of the tongue of the poets. She who dwells on the tip of the tongue of the poets. Swami Vivekananda said that when he was to speak at the Parliament of Religions in Chicago, before he rose to speak, he saluted Saraswati, the goddess of wisdom, and the goddess of speech. And it said that in reality, not that he perhaps saw this, but in principle, she sat on his tongue as he spoke at the Parliament of Religions and hypnotized everyone with his words of wisdom, not actually hypnotized, but enchanted everyone with his words. She's also Gayatri, the Gayatri Mantra. The goddess of the Gayatri Mantra is also known as Gayatri, and that also is Saraswati. She's known as Vidyadatri, the giver of knowledge, and Vidyadayini, the same thing. As Pustakadharini, the holder of the book, the Veda. Pustaka means book, and here it refers to the Veda. Dharini, the holder of the book. She is Veena Vadini, she who knows and plays the Veena, the musical instrument, and the Veena Pani, she has a Veena in her hands. Hamsavahini, she who has the swan as her vehicle, and she's known as Sharada and Sarada, with the Talavya Sha for Sanskritists and the Dantya Sa, the two different S's in Sanskrit. Sharada, like an SH sound, close to an SH sound, and Sarada, just an S sound. Holy Mother, Sarada Devi, is Sarada. And so Sri Ramakrishna used to say that she, the Holy Mother, is Sarada. She is a Saraswati, come to give knowledge to humanity. So she who could hardly read and write, but she was the goddess of wisdom, Saraswati, and really the goddess of wisdom. So Sarada with a dental S means she who gives the essence. The essence is Brahman, the knowledge of Brahman. She gives the essence of knowledge. And Sharada, she who is associated with Sharat, the autumn festival. And so Saraswati, as Durga also, Saraswati is associated with the autumn festival. She was worshipped by the Jainas and Buddhists. The oldest existing statue of Saraswati is a Jaina statue of Saraswati. So many people say that the Jainas and the Buddhists are atheists. They don't believe in God. Yes, they don't believe in God, Ishvara, but they do believe in the gods and goddesses. And so Saraswati is worshipped in Buddhist countries, and she is worshipped among the Jainas. And the oldest existing statue, it doesn't mean it was the first ever made, but the oldest existing statue of Saraswati is a Jaina statue of Saraswati. She's considered to be responsible for the dissemination of the teachings of the Tirthankaras, the great teachers, the 24 Tirthankaras, the great teachers and founders of Jainism. In Tibet, they worship Saraswati, where she's known as Yangchen Drolma. She's considered to be an aspect of Tara. Tara is the patron deity of Tibet. And so Saraswati, the goddess of learning, is one of her aspects, and she's considered to be the goddess of music. As she is in India, the goddess of music, so in Tibet, she's the goddess of music. In Myanmar, old Burma, Myanmar, the students pray for her blessings for their studies, as they do in India. She's worshipped in Cambodia, in Thailand, in Indonesia. In Japan, she's worshipped. I've seen images of her in Japan. She's worshipped as Benzaiten. I don't know the correct Japanese pronunciation, but it looks like Benzaiten. One of the most famous temples of Saraswati is now in ruins. It's the ancient temple, a very old temple called Sharada Pita in POK, Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. The part of Kashmir occupied by Pakistan. That was a great seat of learning and a great university, Sharada Pita. And it was because of that great seat of learning in Kashmir, that the whole of Kashmir came to be known as Sharada Desha, the land of Saraswati. Sharada, the land of Sharada, that is the land of Saraswati. And the Saraswati Brahmins who were from Kashmir, they settled, after the invasion, they settled in South India. My own guru, Swami Vivekananda, he was a Saraswati Brahmin from near Mangalore. So the origins of Saraswati, however, and there's a huge amount of information I wanted to give you. I can't give you all of it, so I'll just give a summation of what I wanted to say today, so that it at least encapsulates some. The name Saraswati comes from Saras, what? Saras means water. And what means possessed of or full of. And so Saraswat, that which is full of water, Saraswati, the feminine, she who is full of water. And so Saraswati originally was the river Saraswati in northwest India, which was the seat of Vedic culture. The Vedic culture arose on the Saraswati River. Now, for a couple of centuries, it was believed that the Saraswati was just a mythological river because it's mentioned in the Vedas, but there was no Saraswati. And some tried to identify it with other rivers, but nothing met the description of the Saraswati in the Vedas. And so it was just figured that, well, it's just a mythological. People make up so many things, and ancient people made up so many things, so they just made up this Saraswati River. But in this century, the 21st century, NASA scientists have seen from satellite pictures of northwest India the ancient riverbed of the Saraswati. And that along that are many of the ruins of what was called the Sindhu culture, and the Harappa Mohenjo-daro culture, and then the Sindhu culture. Now some have renamed it to the Saraswati culture. Because it's along this ancient riverbed where many ruins are found. And so Saraswati was the name of the river because it was filled with water, a great river system which came from the Himalayas down to the ocean in present-day Gujarat. And this river in time was personified. It started as a river, but a holy river. The Saraswati had much the place that the Ganges, the Ganga, the Ganges River has in classical Hinduism. From the late Vedic times, in the Vedic times itself, there were cataclysmic geological processes in motion, which changed the flow of the watershed. And so the Saraswati River no longer received large quantities of water, and gradually it dried up in the desert. And so now there's just a stream which dries in the middle of the desert. And it's no longer a flowing, year-round, flowing, gushing, large river as it once was. And so that happened in the time of the Brahmanas itself, this change which brought about the drying up of the Saraswati. So that in the Mahabharata it said that the Saraswati dies in the desert. This great river, as the Ganges, again, later in classical Hinduism, as the Ganges River was personified and became a goddess, Ganga Devi, so the Saraswati was worshipped because of its importance to the civilization. But in Vedic and Hindu civilization, and the continuation of Hindu civilization, the tendency was to see divinity everywhere, because that was the principle, that divinity is everywhere. Everything's a manifestation of divinity. And so wherever you can see a special manifestation of divinity, there you naturally worship. So you can worship anything if within that thing it calls to mind divinity. Like a cow, why not worship a cow? Because everything is divine. A cow also is divine, but the cow has special qualities which remind us of divinity. And so with the river, it became worshipped. And you see in the Vedas the gradual transformation of the river to a goddess associated with the river. And then the goddess herself remains and the river disappears. And so it's a very interesting religious progression that you see, evolution of the religious concept. So in the Vedic times, early Vedic times, it was a great river. And it's mentioned 50 different times in the Samhitas. So the location of the Saraswati River Basin was a little southeast, but mainly to the east of the Sindhu River. And it was perhaps what's now called the Hakra Gaghar. Let's see, what is it? I forget the Hakra Gaghar River, which is an insignificant river now because, again, it dries up in the desert. It was also identified, the Saraswati River, when it was alive, it was identified with the Milky Way. That is our view of our own galaxy that we see across the sky, the Milky Way. And it's interesting that in ancient cultures around the world, as in the Vedic culture, the Milky Way was seen as the path to immortality. And so there was the Milky Way in the sky, and its reflection was the Saraswati River on the earth. So both were seen as a pathway to immortality. The goddess is, as a goddess, she's first mentioned in the Rig Veda, and she's mentioned in all of the Vedas except for the Atharva Veda. The Atharva Veda was a later Veda and later accepted into the corpus of Vedic literature, but it doesn't mention the Saraswati. There's a famous passage in the Rig Veda, in the Samhita, which says, Ambitame, Naditame, Devitame, Saraswati, Aprashastaiva, Smasi, Prashastim Amba Naskridhi, which means, O Mother Saraswati, you are the greatest of mothers. Ambitame, greatest of mothers. Noditame, you are the greatest of rivers. Devitame, you are the greatest of goddesses. So here you see the river was seen as a mother because it brought about, it nourished Vedic civilization. Vedic civilization grew and developed on the banks of its river and of the river. And so it nourished and brought into being Vedic civilization. So you are the greatest of mothers, you are the greatest of rivers, and you are the greatest of goddesses, because you, O river, are a goddess. Even though we are not worthy, please grant us distinction. The prayer goes on. So again, she's mentioned in the Rig Veda Samhita 50 times, and most of those times as a goddess. in classical Hinduism, she is just a goddess. The river has been largely forgotten. The river has become a mythological river. And as you know, in the Triveni in Prayag, Allahabad, Prayag, the meeting of the three rivers. There's the Ganga and Yamuna who join their waters in Prayag. And it's said that the third river underground joins its waters also, which is the Sarasvati. And so in Hinduism, one of the features of Hinduism you see throughout the history of Hinduism from Vedic times is the idea of preservation. That you don't throw out old ideas because you get new ideas. You think my new ideas are better ones, so let me throw out the old ideas. No, everything is preserved. So Saraswati, the river which was so holy to the people, so holy that it was worshipped as a goddess, that it became a goddess, and then the river itself disappeared, the goddess remained, and even the river was, in the people's mind, it remained as an underground river that joined the Ganga and Yamuna in Allahabad, in Prayag. So she's beautiful. She's worshipped all over India. She's beautiful in conception. She's the image of pure sattva guna. She's dressed all in white. Every part of her symbolism is white because she's a symbol of, and that's not for racist reasons, because in India they worship Kali also, who's black. They worship Krishna, who's blue, and they worship Rama, who is green. But Saraswati is pure white because she's pure luminosity. She's pure, it's not a racial thing. It's a mental characteristic because she is knowledge itself, the brightest of conceptions, the most luminous of conceptions. And so she holds in her hands, she has 4 arms usually. She holds in one hand Pustaka, the book, which is the Veda, because she is the goddess of knowledge. And so the root of all knowledge is sacred knowledge, the Veda. And then she holds in another hand a mala, made of crystal, because again, everything with her is clear, bright, luminous. So she holds a crystal mala, japa mala, that is a rosary, because she's the goddess of speech and she's the goddess of sacred science, and the goddess of the letters. Another name of her is Varaneshwari, goddess of the letters. And so the mala represents language itself and sacred science. And she holds the kamandalu, there's the traditional water pot. And so you see there her association again with water. That association continues. And then she's holding a veena, the musical instrument, because she's the goddess of music. And then she has the hamsa, the swan, which is her vehicle, and she's seated on a white lotus. Again, everything about her, her clothing, her ornamentation, everything about her is white because she's the image of purity, of luminosity, of clarity, of sattva guna. And also she's often pictured with a peacock. The peacock is an interesting symbol because the peacock is a symbol of beauty, but the peacock also kills snakes. And so the peacock represents the alchemical ability of transforming poison into beauty. So the idea is that it kills snake, which is full of poison, and out of that comes the colorful tail of the peacock. And the beautiful, not just the tail, the whole peacock is beautiful from beak to tail, beautiful colors. And she's also, in pictures of Saraswati, she's often seated near a stream. So again, that association with the Saraswati River is carried on through the image of Saraswati. Now, in our tradition, the Ramakrishna tradition, we observe Saraswati Puja in our educational institutions and at Belur-Math. In the educational institutions, Saraswati Puja is a big occasion, and it's a time when all over India students seek the blessing of Saraswati for their education. As I said, Swami Vivekananda saluted Saraswati before he began his speech at the Parliament of Religions. And Holy Mother, Sri Ramakrishna said, as I've already mentioned, was Sarada Saraswati, come to give knowledge to human beings. And So there's a beautiful hymn from the Sharada Tilaka. I don't have the Sanskrit. I couldn't find the Sanskrit for this particular hymn. So I'll just read the English because it's all I have. It says, "May the goddess of speech enable us to attain all possible eloquence. She who wears on her locks the young moon, who shines with exquisite luster, who sits reclined on a white lotus, and from the crimson cusp of whose hands pours radiance on the implements of writing and books produced by her favor." So it's a beautiful meditation on the image of Saraswati. So now it's time to close. So let me just say again, just sort of to bring many things together, so to summarize things the best that I can, that the idea of the deities is that you cannot, in one conception of God, you can't contain infinite ideas. God to most people is G-O-D, just a word, a conception. Even the idea of God being omnipresent, God is everywhere, that's just a conception. We don't know what it means to be everywhere, because the whole of God is everywhere. The whole of God is right here. The whole of God is there. The whole of God is on the moon. The whole of God is everywhere, because God is not spatial, can't be divided. So what that means, we can't conceive. So the gods and goddesses, they manifest the glory of the divine being. They make it more conceivable, more approachable, more lovable as well. To conceive of these beautiful forms of Saraswati, of Lakshmi, of Kali, of Durga, of Uma, Parvati, of Shiva, Vishnu, Rama, Krishna, all of these different, Hanuman, all of these different deities, it manifests the infinite variety of the divine being, so that we can conceive of it, so that we can approach it. And it gives us a feeling of being connected to particular aspects of divinity when we want that. If it's learning I'm after, there is Saraswati, the goddess of wisdom. Let me approach her. If I'm trying to master music, Saraswati, let me approach her. If I'm starting a business and I'm hoping to be able for the business to be prosperous, let me approach Lakshmi. If I'm filled with renunciation, or if I want someone who I feel will accept me just as I am, I approach Shiva. Shiva, the embodiment of renunciation, but also his companions are ghosts and goblins. Those whom society has rejected, they find shelter at the feet of Shiva. He who is Asutosha, who is easily pleased. If I love beauty, then let me approach Vishnu. Let me approach Vishnu and his incarnations, Krishna and Rama. If I want heroism, let me approach Rama. If I want playfulness, let me approach Krishna. And not that these are exclusive, that only Krishna has playfulness and only Rama has heroism and so forth, but I'm just giving examples of how we find in these different images an approach to these divine qualities manifested in an approachable, comprehensible form. The closer we go, the more we find the deities melting into the infinite, becoming infinite. But they are manifestations of the infinite in ways that we can begin to understand, we can approach. And for people who, and again, there's nothing necessary about the deities in one's spiritual life, but if you find them interesting, if you find them appealing, one who spends their time thinking of the deities finds that the deities begin to enter into their life. They become realities in your psychological life. They even can become realities in your everyday life in ways like in Sri Ramakrishna's father. That's rare, but that's not unique. There are others also who have seen deities interacting in their everyday life with them. And so by making the deities real, we find that our mind dwells more and more with them, where it finds satisfaction in their company, rather than in the dullness of ordinary life. That may sound negative to some people, but it's not negative at all. It's a wonderful thing when you find that this world itself, here in this world where everything seems so hard, dull, dead, unconscious material, that even here the deities are active. Even here the deities interact with me. So Sri Ramakrishna said that a Hindu will keep on the walls of their house pictures of gods and goddesses. He would go to people's houses and see pictures of the Queen, Queen Victoria, or other European pictures and so forth. He would say, a good Hindu keeps pictures of gods and goddesses because it reminds us of the spirit, but in ways that the mind can relate and conceive of. So let me give announcements, then I'll see if there's a question, and then I'll give a closing chant. So for announcements, we will have the usual classes on Tuesday at 7:30 p.m., the class on the Bhagavad Gita live streamed here. On Thursday at 11 o'clock in the morning, we'll have the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna also live streamed. And next Sunday, I will speak, I believe it's on the Drigdrishya Viveka. Or is it Dharma? It's one or the other. I forget which is which. Anyway, next Sunday there's a talk. And it's announced on the website, and also a mailer has been sent out. And by next Sunday, I will know which one it is. So are there any questions, Surenji?
There's no question, but I have a question.
Yes, Suren has a question.
The question is about these pictures. How did they come into being? Like Shiva looks like this, and Ganesh looks like this. They're ancient beings, they're deities, unknown timing. Who kind of came up with this idea, and how were they put in the thought they are?
Yes. So the question is very good, and that is, how did the deities come into the form that we have now? Where did the forms as we see them in pictures of Shiva, pictures of Rama, Krishna, pictures of Ganesha? How were they conceived of, and how did these forms come down to us? So as Swami Vivekananda said, the deities were seen by great sages in super conscious vision. And so that's where we get the idea of what they look like. But modern representations are the artist's rendering of a traditional view. So if you have a deity like Saraswati, it's traditional that she has certain things, that she has the book and the mala and the veena, etc., that she has the swan, that she's seated by the water. That's all traditional, and that has come down because of the experience of saintly people in the culture who had visions of Saraswati. But the particular artist's representation then is seen in a certain way. Like I myself, I have to admit, I really do not like Indian calendar art. I really do not like it because it makes the deities look like cartoons. Very childish, very poor art. They look cartoonish. I know what they're trying to do. The calendar artists, they're trying to make them look spiritual rather than physical. But because of their incapacity, they make them look like cartoon figures, like Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck. And but the general pattern, that is traditional and that is sacred. And so Swami Vivekananda told Sister Nivedita told Swamiji that she was going to ask her girls in her school to draw pictures of, to paint Kali. So Swamiji said, let them paint Kali according to their own conception. Don't give them a definition that this is what you have to produce. Imitate this. Swamiji said, no. Let them, they know about Kali, they've learned from you about Kali, and they learn from their mothers and from the culture. Let them conceive of Kali as they conceive of it. Swamiji knew the value of tradition, but he also knew that tradition can become a straitjacket which prevents new and growing development and expression. And so, yes, respect tradition, but also express the deities as your conception develops. Now, of course, the danger with that, yes, there is a danger. Nowadays in Calcutta, most of the images of Durga are made to look like movie stars. and they're actually patterned after particular and recognizable as, oh, this Durga is made to look like that sexy movie star from Bollywood, and so forth. And so that cheapening of the making of the images to make them look like pop figures and sex symbols, that's not what Swami Vivekananda meant. He meant knowing the tradition, knowing the meaning of the deity, then let the artist give new expression to the image. And so anyway, that's the short answer is it comes from tradition and then the artist's own rendering of that tradition. So let me give a closing chant, and this is from the Saraswati Stotram. And this says, Ya kundendu tushara hara dhavala ya shubhra vastravrita ya veena varada mandita kara ya shweta padmasana ya brahmachyuta shankara prabhriti bhir devai sada vandita sa mam patu saraswati bhagavati nishesha jadyapaha. O Goddess Saraswati, white as snow, as the moon, white as gardenias, and clothed in white garments, holding a magnificent itself which is white, and seated on a white lotus, ever worshipped with offerings from Brahma, Vishnu, Maheshwara, and other gods, protect us from all forms of ignorance and delusion. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us all.